Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose of Giving. We're so glad that you're here with us today for a really timely and essential conversation about where philanthropy stands right now. A fun moment of personal privilege. The first time I experienced real fear was right here in this theater in 1999 in 8th grade during a screening of the Blair Witch Project. So I'm so glad to be here with you all today so that we can keep that fear alive about the current state of generosity in our country. Just kidding. But before we dive in, I do want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to our partners and venue hosts who made today possible, the Terra Theater. Thank you so much for hosting us today. Yay! Atlanta Film Society and Giving USA. So thank you so much. I also want to thank our amazing Purpose Possible team who pulled together today's event. Thank you all so much. For those who don't know me, I'm Susannah Darrow. I am one of the co-founders and CEO of Purpose Possible. And this year I had the pleasure of serving on the editorial review board for the Giving USA report. So if you find any typos, please don't tell me. But it is happy to have you all here, and we're really excited to be able to share the data today. At Purpose Possible, our core mission is to power mission-driven organizations to transform your communities. And so we work side by side with leaders and change makers like all of you in this room every day across fundraising and organizational strategy and strategic philanthropy. And we really aim to serve as a trusted partner and very practical resource for organizations and nonprofit professionals across the country. And because we luckily are able to be in the trenches with so many of you all, we also get really a front row seat to real-time challenges, evolving trends, and the things across the sector that you all are seeing and experiencing every day. And that's why we're really excited for today's conversation about this report. Certainly for anybody who's gotten a copy in the mail yet, you know it is a 785-page doorstopper, and I'm guessing you all have not had time to read the whole thing yet. So with that in mind, we're excited to be able to really unpack that data today and be able to pull out some of the things that we are seeing as some of the biggest headlines and trends that are going to have the greatest impact on your fundraising, on the way that you're approaching the work that you're doing. So to help us break down what that actually means, I am very happy to introduce and bring up our Director of Strategic Philanthropy, Laura Hennighausen. She is our resident data insights nerd for Purpose Possible, and she is going to go through that data, and then we'll be able to bring our panel up and have a conversation about what this is looking like on the ground. So, Laura, please.
All right, welcome everybody. So I'm curious, I know Susannah was just saying probably you haven't had a chance to read it. Has anybody read the Giving USA report? I'm glad you did since you helped write it. That's a good start. Okay, well, who's excited? Yeah! So Giving USA is something that comes out once a year. And it is the longest running, most authoritative annual measure of American giving. It tracks giving by source and giving by recipient. It is, as Susannah said, a really large report. You can look at just infographics, which are helpful if you would like to do that. And I'm going to walk you through the pieces that are most important and break down how to actually read some of this, because there are a little bit of intricacies to this. It's important to remember this is not a feeling survey. These are real hard data from IRS reports. Some of it are estimates, and they do offer a revised version once the hard data comes in later. But this is all based on real things. So what we're going to see is real, and again, this is national. So this is kind of our macro, big picture look at giving. This is put together each year by the Giving USA Foundation and the Indiana University School Lilly Philanthropy. So that is where this comes from. And why you should care. So this is macro, right? And I'm sure a lot of us here are working with small organizations, small to mid-sized organizations. And so sometimes it's hard to look at this data and understand why this should matter to us. But really, this is going to help you benchmark where you are in your organization. If you're having trouble with a certain part of fundraising, or you're feeling like something's shifting, you can look to this national data to see if that checks out, or if maybe it's just you. Probably not, though. So that's why these things are important, even though this seems like kind of big sky to look at. Things to keep in mind when you are approaching Giving USA. This is, so it's Giving USA 2026. It is data from 2025. So we're always a year behind because we are looking at tax returns and things like that. So keep that in mind. What you are experiencing right now today might not be exactly what we see in the numbers, but is what we saw and will help us plan, right? Corporate giving. When we talk about corporate giving, and when you see a lot of statistics about corporate giving and Giving USA and other places, always remember this always includes also in-kind donations, right? So when we talk about that, and when you're thinking about corporate giving in your mix, keep that in mind. This is not all just dollars and cents. And then the last thing to keep in mind as we get started is this does not include government funding. This is all private philanthropy, so it is foundations, individuals, bequests, and corporate giving. Got it? Okay. So big headline is this year, or the year before, the Giving USA report, we saw over $617 billion in giving, which is a 5.4 increase. This is the largest amount ever, right? So this is significant. We should be happy to see this number, right? It's a lot of money out there. When we talk about fundraising and think, where am I going to find the money for my budget this year? Theoretically, there is a lot of money out there, right? So that is what we're tracking. The average year-to-year change over the past 40 years, so again, Giving USA has been happening for 40 years. The average year-to-year change is about $13 billion. This year's jump was $33 billion. So we saw a significant jump over the last year. Giving usually does increase. It has increased every year except 4 years since 1985. So this is something that we like to see, and we will continue to track. Now we're going to do a little bit of a hands up scenario a couple times here, so I can see who's paying attention. Over the last 20 years, this is really tall, the percentage of Americans who gave to charity, who thinks it has gone up? Percentage of Americans giving. Okay. Who thinks it has stayed flat? Okay. Who thinks it has decreased? All right. It has gone down. It has decreased. So that is something important for us to think about when we're looking at this data too, right? The number of folks participating in the donor economy is shrinking individual-wise. The other thing to note is that when surveyed the general public, only about 30% of people know that this is a thing, that fundraising is something that we're even here talking about today. Like, the general public does not know any of this. So we can't assume that when we are fundraising that our clients, our constituents, our donors know any of this kind of thing and why it's important. So let's look next on why this is happening. This is our Giving USA from that report. This is the share of giving. So this is not based on number of donors, this is based off of dollars. So you can see individuals are at 64%. That is usually standard. Individuals are usually the largest percentage of giving. So when you guys are planning your giving, plans for the year, individual giving should be something you guys are always really thinking about. We can't only rely on foundations, corporations, and such. The second share here is foundations. Then we have corporations here for 7%. That's pretty standard. It's not a huge share. So when we're looking at our corporate partners, or you've got a board member telling you to go call Delta, this is helpful data to have, right? To show them that's not maybe where we should be putting our eggs right now. And then we've got 10% in bequest. A bequest is a gift given after death to a nonprofit that was specified in the will of a person. So that is also individual giving, but it is giving after death. Make sense? We will have Q&A at the end too, so if you have questions, we will do that. So out of those sources, which source grew the fastest the last year? Raise your hand if you think it's foundations that grew the fastest. Okay. Individuals? Okay. Corporations? Oh, optimists. Okay. Bequests? Yes. Bequest grew significantly, 19.7%. That's a huge jump, right, for this type of data. This is a big deal. That is a $10 billion jump from the year before, and that accounts for roughly 1/3 of that entire year's, or this entire year's, increase in giving. So remember when we were talking about there's a $33 billion increase, a big chunk of that is just based off of bequests, okay? One of those bequests, if you look at the Chronicle of Philanthropy's Philanthropy 50, where they talk about the top donors or top donations made each year, one of those, or 5 of those actually were bequests. So 5 of those biggest donations were bequests. One of them was an entire estate of, let's see, $102 million that was left to Georgia Tech's engineering school. So that's happening right here. We are seeing foundations grow a little bit, but often what we're seeing in the data, and this is just something interesting to me, I guess, at least, foundation growth is really based on the market right now. It's more that the market is growing rather than more people are putting money into foundations. So that's also something to keep track of. And when we're thinking about the payout rate for foundations and whether it's keeping track with how much money they're actually making from the market, that's something that goes into our conversation about whether the 5% rule for foundations is adequate. So let's look at this over a period of time. So 40 years ago, individuals were 80% of all giving by source. Now they're down to 65%, even as total dollars climbed. So even though we're getting more money from individuals, the number of individuals giving is lower. Foundations went from 7% to 18% over that same stretch, and bequests went from 7 to 10%. Corporate giving has stayed flat during that time. It's usually about 1% of pre-tax corporate income. So that tells us again that individuals are always where it's at, even if that's shifting a little bit. We are seeing fewer households are giving at all. We know that the recent data, so the recent data that we have available about how many households give is as of 2020. If you think of 2020, that was a pretty charitable year, right? There was a lot going on, a lot of reasons for people to be giving. In 2020, 40% or 47% rather of American households donated, but that was down from 2018. We had 50%. So it is decreasing. Even if we see a decrease in 2020 when it's a big charitable year, that should mean something to us. It used to really mean that giving more was about more people chipping in, and really now it's starting to be that fewer people are giving larger chunks, right? So we're seeing the rise of the mega donor, people like Mackenzie Scott, and other folks that are kind of lumping their giving in that way. So it's shifting how our data looks. The thing that I think we should keep in mind from a lot of this data is that all of the major stats, all of the growth that we saw in bequests, in DAFs, and things like that, the through line there is that those are all gifts based on trust and relationship building, right? You don't get an individual leaving you a bequest, most likely, who has never donated to you before, that you've never talked to before. So building that trust, building relationships with your individual donors is key to unlocking a lot of where fundraising is going as we move forward. So let's see who received those dollars. This shows that religion still is in the top. Religion has always been number one. Always, always, always. Why is that? Because they ask, right? They ask regularly. They have trained you to tithe. They have these systems in place that we can all very much learn from. 23% went to religion. That is down. It has been decreasing. So it used to be about 50% of giving, even 40 years ago, went to religion. We do see there is some interesting new data coming out, though, that younger donors are giving even more to religion than millennials. So something to pay attention to. Human services is number 2. Human services jumped education about 4 or 5 years ago. And education has been pretty steady. Education is usually at about 12 to 14% of that. I will walk you through very quickly, because I know there's always questions around what do these categories mean. Arts, culture, and humanities, pretty self-explanatory. Education. If you are in a nonprofit that is working in pre-K to 12, K-12, vocational schools, technical schools, higher education, graduate school, all of that kind of stuff is in education. Health covers healthcare, so like hospitals, things like that. Also mental health and crisis intervention, diseases, disorders and medical disciplines, and medical research. Human services is the biggest one. That's our biggest bucket. These are all, by the way, also categorized based on the NTEE code. So whatever your nonprofit's NTEE is where you would be in here. Human services covers crime and legal related organizations. So that's like law enforcement, crime prevention, offender rehabilitation. It includes employment. So workforce development work is often in there. Food, agriculture, and nutrition, housing and shelter, public safety and disaster relief, recreation and sports. So that is community recreation, Special Olympics, things like that. Youth development, and then just general human services, which are like multi-purpose service organizations. So that's a really big bucket that we have a lot of folks in. The public society benefit bucket is civil rights, community improvement, capacity building, philanthropy, so like your United Ways would be here, science and technology, social science, and public and societal benefit. The other thing that is often asked is that where do DAFs fit in to this, right? So when a donor is putting money into a DAF, there's no like DAF section here, right? Where you would find DAF data is based on the category of the DAF holder. So community foundations would be in foundations. Groups like Fidelity would be in public society benefit, so DAFs held there. And then groups that are issue specific, so like if you have a DAF at the Jewish Federation, that would be in religion. Make sense? So the DAF number is interesting, but it's kind of broken up into a variety of places here. The other thing to note that I think is interesting is the growth of 501c3s. So we're seeing the numbers, how much we have available to us fundraising. Same time, there are more of us, right? So things are shifting. We see about an average 3% growth rate in 501c3s year over year. So if you think again about foundations or other donors not increasing necessarily the amount they're giving, or even if they are, there's also more people in the pool. There's people also that have lost federal funding that are going to private funders. So some of these things are getting scrambled. Now, we're going to take a break here for a second. Raise your hand if you can think of a philanthropist. Would hope all of you, right? We all know what a philanthropist is. Bill Gates. Only 47% of the general population can name a philanthropist. That's kind of crazy, right? Only 47% of people can name a philanthropist. Half of those that could named Bill Gates. This is like what we are thinking of, what the general population thinks of. They don't think of themselves as philanthropists, even if they are donors. They are thinking of these giant mega donors that are in the news for their giving, right? So as we're talking to our donors about that, that's something important to kind of think about. We don't really see ourselves in this data. Raise your hand if you think that DAFs are primarily for those big mega donors like Bill Gates. Yeah, right? They're not. DAFs are for all size donors, and there's some really interesting data about this. DAFs have been around since like the 1930s, and 2/3 of DAF gifts in this year were under $1,000. So when you're thinking about your individual giving and how do we figure out who has a DAF or something, those are normal people. Those are probably some of us in here even, maybe, right? So we see a lot of those DAF gifts are small. Only 2% of DAF gifts were over $25,000. DAFs make up 22% of major gifts, but major gifts are only 2% of DAF donations, right? So that is something important. DAFs are not just a rich person thing, and that is why how people give is also important and what is in the data as well. So we see a lot in shifts here around giving from DAFs, giving of non-cash based assets, QCDs. This is some of the stuff that our panel today is going to go into, and how small nonprofits, like many of us, can start to think about incorporating this and why it's important to. We saw a lot of changes in DAF giving. DAF giving is growing. We are also seeing that DAF holders, first of all, DAF holders are the most loyal in the research. DAF holders are the ones that tend to give and give each year to the same organizations. We are also seeing that DAF holders are diversifying. They're starting to give to more organizations. And we saw a giant jump in the data as far as how much money was moved into DAFs in December of last year because of these bunching practices because of the tax changes, right? So there's a lot of money in these DAFs, and we need to think about that, making sure that our donors know how to donate to you if they have a DAF, right? How does it work? What's easy? How can a donor set up a QCD to your organization? That's important. Vast majority of folks at organizations could not talk a donor through that. Who here is really great with QCDs and like knows all the things? Tim, yes, thank you. And that's why he's on the panel, so he can tell you how to do it. A QCD is a qualified charitable distribution. That is a way where a donor who is 70 and a half or above can take their required distribution from their IRA and give it right to a charity so that they're not taxed on it, right? This is a really big deal. That's a really great chunk of money that we could be accessing, but we're not talking about it to our donors. So that's something that's growing that we need to pay attention to and is covered in the data. Raise your hand if you trust nonprofits more than Congress. I'm looking for anybody not holding their hands up. That's important too, right? 39% only, which sounds kind of sad, but 39% of Americans trust nonprofits completely, like the highest rate. Only 6% for Congress, and I think this was like a year or two ago, so that might have shifted even a little bit more. But nonprofits are more trusted than Congress, than any other entity out there in America, right? We are the most trusted industry, even if that seems a little low, but that is the truth. We are the most trusted. But only 5% of Americans say that they or an immediate family member received nonprofit services in the last year. That's crazy, right? People aren't making the connection that public parks, that their child's school, that curb cuts and sidewalks, that all of these things are here as a result of nonprofits. They don't know that the Atlanta Film Society is related in some way to the Terra Theater, or how any of this works together, right? That is an us problem. That is something we really need to focus on. If the majority of money is held with individuals, if we are seeing that there are all these opportunities from QCDs and DAFs and all of the like, but individuals by and large aren't understanding that we are nonprofits and that we accept donations and that yes, you too can donate to us, we are missing a whole lot of money here. So this is something that's super important. We are focused on trust. We know they trust us. They just don't know who we are. So that is something we need to focus on. And we see that even though things aren't always great, the trust matters. So we saw that in this year for Giving USA, 54% of Americans describe their personal finances as distressing. I think many of us can feel that. We work in nonprofits, right? 40% expected the economy to get worse, but they still gave, right? We aren't seeing that much of a tie between people's personal finances and their generosity. Even though we might be hurting, just like we were in COVID, right? People were hurting, but they were generous. They wanted to help. They want to feel like part of a community. So it's our job and opportunity to explain to them, this is how you do it. This is who we are. I am a nonprofit. You can donate to me. Not me personally, but you can if you would like. We accept tips. No bribes. But that's something to keep in mind as we're getting discouraged about all of the things out there around us. We really can focus on these individuals that are right on our doorstep that just need a little bit of a push. So if you take away just 4 main things from my part here, stop measuring success on how many people you are touching or how many people are getting your newsletter or something like that, although those are important. Sorry, Audie. Think more about how many you would lose if the economy or something did shift. Who are you really building relationships with? Those are the things you need to measure and value, is that deepening of relationship, consistent communication, honesty, transparency. That trust is built on honesty and transparency, right? Folks want to know what's going on. So make sure that that is a priority in your giving or your fundraising. Bequests, DAFs, non-cash assets, these things, this is not a someday thing. This is not like, yeah, when I get a development director and they have 3 assistants or something. This is something we all need to be thinking about now. It's out there. The great wealth transfer, as we all hear about with boomers transferring wealth, that's starting to happen. We're going to see it, right? So you guys need to be ready to accept that money. Make sure it's as easy as possible. There are easy ways to do it, and I'm sure the Community Foundation can help us with that as well. You have more trust than you think. You don't have to be a giant organization with a huge name like St. Jude's or something for people to trust your organization, right? In fact, we see often that smaller organizations are more trusted because we feel like there's more transparency, there's more eyes on what's going on, right? So use that to your advantage. And then don't wait for donor confidence to feel high before you ask. Don't wait for the market to be great. Don't wait for, the administration to change. People are giving now. This doesn't really impact their generosity. So give. Don't wait till the end of the year to make your ask either. Be asking throughout the year. People are ready and willing to help you. Highlights, just again, highest generosity, highest giving ever, so over $600 billion. Donor giving is still sliding. We're seeing fewer folks. We're seeing more mega donors. So we're seeing some shift in there. We also know that way more people are going to be eligible for a charitable deduction. That means that we need to not just focus on our mega donors. We need to think about how we're building relationships with those smaller donors, everyday folk. And then we know, again, gifts, how they're arriving is changing. So bequests are up. We're seeing lots of bequests. Make sure you're focused on that. Make sure you're thinking about how to get your DAFs in and things in that way. So that's what I got for you. I hope I teed up some things for you and Sue and the panel. Let's see. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, so this is the data. What you guys do with it is up to you, right? Whether you pay attention to this in your fundraising planning or not, this kind of data is here. Purpose Possible is here to help you understand some of this data or help tell your board about some of this data. But it's really up to us. We know what's out there. We know that the trust exists. We know that a lot of folks just don't know where to give or aren't being asked. So now it's our turn to figure that out. And I'm going to pass it back over to Susannah and our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. All right, everyone look away while we get in these chairs. Thank you. All right, so we have a lot to think about now as our panel comes up. And we're excited to chop it up here about what this is looking like within some organizations. Before we jump in, I want to do quick intros for our panel that we have here today. Thank you all so much for being here with us. Megan Denton, who is here, is the Director of Development for Ignatius House Jesuit Retreat Center. She leads individual giving, donor engagement, annual fundraising, and capital campaign efforts. She has more than 15 years of experience in nonprofit fundraising and communications, and most recently completed a $10.5 million campaign in 2 years. Nicely done. Congrats. Jaz Vick is the Managing Director of Development for One Goal in Georgia and has held roles with Scouting America and Boys and Girls Clubs. He has more than a decade of organizational leadership experience across youth development, faith-based organizations, and community-centered work. Thanks for being here, Jaz. And Tim Bresnahan is the Vice President of Advancement and Philanthropic Services at the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta. And he leads the Community Foundation's strategic work to inspire philanthropy within and throughout the Atlanta region and ensures that donors to the foundation receive exceptional stewardship and advice. Thank you all so much for being here. So happy to have y'all. So I want to start with a question, which is, we are hearing clearly we're operating in a trust economy. We've seen from Center for Effective Philanthropy's reports over the last few years that trust in nonprofits has been declining. It's still higher than trust in Congress. Let's stay there. But it does mention that the report this year mentions that organizations that captured the most support were not the largest, which has been true in other years, but truly were the ones that had the strongest degree of trust and the greatest visibility within their existing donor pools before they were getting to a point where they were making the ask. So as we're thinking about folks that are in this room, especially that may be at a smaller to mid-sized nonprofit that doesn't have, like Laura said, that degree of visibility of a major institutional sized nonprofit, what are some things that you all are doing to signal trustworthiness to your donors? How are you showing what that transparency looks like at your organizations right now? Or Jaz, kick us off.
Sure. So one of the ways that we signal trust and allow for greater transparency is bringing folks into the work and ensuring that as we make changes, asking for advice, getting insights from those who have trusted us with their dollars, and really just allowing them to walk alongside us as we go through any changes and opportunities for growth.
Awesome.
I would add in there, a really important part is the attentiveness that you pay to donors with each of their gifts. And so it can be as small as something like if they give to a certain appeal or whatever, that donor thank you letter, that first touch that they have from you is specific to that gift so that the donor feels seen and knows that you're paying attention. I think that's, and then, as tedious as it is, those January tax letters that we send out where it shows aggregated giving, those have to be right. Donors have to go, okay, this is, this matches what I'm giving. If our tax letters aren't correct, then, they're going to go, well, where did my money go? And then another big part is just follow up. And so if someone is giving to a specific cause or specific thing, a specific segment maybe of your work, to follow up with them and let them know that thing happened. I don't know how many of us have given to a nonprofit for a thing, for a specific thing, and then you never heard anything about it. And you wonder, I wonder if that even happened, that thing that I gave to. Honestly, that happened to the organization that I'm working at now. When I was a donor before I was on staff, they said, we're doing retreats for homeless people. And I thought, well, this is awesome. I want to give. And then, I kept reading their newsletters. I kept looking, but I wonder if they ever did that retreat for homeless people. So that follow-up and letting them know, not, the relationship doesn't end once you receive the gift from them, but it's the continual keeping them in touch with that kind of stuff. And I do think that small and medium-sized nonprofits are great with this, because we can make our donors feel like they are one of few and not one of thousands.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. So when we think about this, it's easy to really imagine that kind of making sure that that's happening within a smaller pool of your donors when you're thinking about maybe the top 10 to 15% of your donor portfolio. What does that look like at scale, though? Like when you're thinking about needing to really have that kind of touch, is it just making sure that that donor database is super clean? Are there any specific kind of tips you can share for how you've really done that at scale to make sure that that's happening across your donors at all sizes?
Hot mic. I think we live and die by the transactional first, so I will reemphasize that. The Community Foundation, in many ways, we are a financial services firm for social impact. That's like our first foundational line of business is donors are trusting us. They've put money aside with us to be invested and deployed for charitable purposes. If the information on their letter is wrong, or when they log into the portal, if their information is wrong, if we're calling them with the wrong number, if we're mailing things when clearly the CRM says do not mail, that's problematic. So I think you can't skip to the relational. So for whatever organization you're in, figuring out what the transactional foundation is of your business is critical. We talk a lot about customer service at the Community Foundation. I think the second part too is, we even though we are a relatively larger organization, we run pretty lean. And so we have to be really thoughtful about how we use resources for donor cultivation. And so we can't boil the ocean. We try to look at data to inform what are the engagement and access points that we give for donors. So if we're looking at our data, and our DAF data tells us, unlike Giving USA, our fourth largest issue area is arts and culture, we need to lean into that a little bit. And so if we're thinking about exclusive events for donors where they can get deeper into the community, arts and culture has to be something that we're talking about above, say, international giving, where a much lower portion of our donors are giving to international giving. So it has to be that right balance of transactional, relational, and the data really should inform both of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. So with this in mind too, right? So we're thinking about how are we building trust? How are we keeping our donors engaged? Laura also shared, and this is something I think many of us seen. I saw several hands go up with the donors are down. And there was a report. It wasn't a report. It was a blog post that I read on LinkedIn. It was a TikTok. But it was interesting. So it is Nathan Chappell, who does a lot of work on nonprofits and AI, wrote a blog post that he took the current donor trends and dropped it into an AI model to see, with the current donor declines, what does that look like if we blow it out over the next century? And what is wild is it shows, honestly, if the current trajectory continued, we will run out of donors in 54 years. There will be no more donors in the United States, which is not going to happen. Obviously, we want to retain them. So as we are thinking about this, though, we know we are in a moment where the dollars are up, mega donors are giving, and they are a disproportionate amount of that, $600 billion plus dollars that we're seeing. But knowing this, how are you all thinking about, as you're within your donor bases, should we be prioritizing bringing in new donors? Should we be focusing on this acquisition and working on trying to kind of offset this generosity crisis that we're in? Or should we just say, let's continue to build these relationships, deepen that. Let's just really focus on keeping the ones we have, maybe getting some bequests in for those donors. What does that look like? How are you all prioritizing that? Especially knowing in a smaller development shop too, there's only so much time in the day. There's only so many campaigns you can send out. What does that look like for you all from a prioritization level?
So I'll jump in. I will say that in my current context, we have to do both. We're in a space where we are increasing our donor base, and traditionally that has not been the biggest leg of the stool for us. And so for me, it's taking the time to analyze the data that we have on the donors who have been consistent and look for ways to deepen those relationships in a meaningful way, while also saying, how can we get more donors who we can then continue to steward in a deeper way. So for us, where we are currently as a growing organization in Georgia, it's a both and.
Yeah, absolutely. Megan, how about you? What's that look like at Ignatius House?
It's definitely a both and. I think if I have to choose, I would focus on retention over acquiring, just because we know from the data that you can count on or hope for 40 to 45% of your donors giving again the next year. And so these are people that have already raised their hand and said, yes, I'm interested in your cause, I care about it. And so, by all means, these are the people that we need to be nurturing and talking to and engaging. But yes, we'll go away pretty quickly if we only focus on our current people, right? And so we have to look within, and I've done fundraising by myself. I'm now blessed to have a half-time person with me, so I totally understand the stress of you can't do it all, right? You have to pick and choose. But within a given appeal, you can segment. I'm all about, a very clean database. So it's super unsexy, but it is so critical to being able to do development well. Going back to your question of how can we on kind of a mass scale kind of do some of our stewardship, so it's not all individual. So, for example, let's say you did a springtime appeal that was focused on a specific thing. So at Ignatius House, we did a springtime appeal that was related to our grounds. So it's kind of off-center of our normal thing, but it was specific to grounds. Well, with a really clean database, and I know exactly who gave to that, I can follow up with them in one email and says, here's what we did with your money. You guys gave $35,000 this spring, and we were able to, do trails, do this, do that. And so that's segmented to those people. It's one email that goes out to everyone, but it shows, we did the thing. But then within an appeal, when you're asking, you can also segment, right? A good database lets you send one version of an email to your existing donors and another version to people that have never donated before that talks to them just a little bit differently. It's the same appeal. We're still asking you to give end of year, still asking you to give for Christmas, but by taking one email, copy paste, and then changing a little bit, we'd love for you to give the first time, we'd love for you to join our donor community. Then you can, that's a fairly simple way to kind of do a both and.
Yeah, Tim, how about you? I mean, I know Community Foundation, you're looking at this largely through sort of donor-advised funds, but as we know, donor-advised fund holders are donors as well. So what does that look like for you all at Community Foundation?
Retention is key for us. It is. If you look at the way that my team is organized, the retention team is twice as big as the new business development team. And so we know that keeping those donors, having them give more, and having them grant more is really critical to our work. And I'll be very candid, we're just now doing an analysis of first half of the year. We're in a calendar year, fundraising year, and fiscal year. And it's been a very soft first half of 2026. The softest we've had in many, many years. And it's been one of the highest grant-making first halves of the year. So as a reminder, in my team, we're looking at contributions mostly to DAFs. And in any given year, about 80% of the grant making out of the Community Foundation is from DAF holders. So the DAF business is the driver of really investment into nonprofit organizations. And this year, currently, we're down about 70 million in contributions relative to last year, and we've granted out more than we've granted out at the same time last year. So, it's fine. That's the nature of our business. It's very cyclical, but to Laura's earlier point, we saw a lot of people move money into DAFs, in 2025 to get ahead of tax law changes. Tax law changes, people are still processing what that means. At the beginning of the year, markets were a little weird because of things like invading a country and inflation. And so, even wealthy people did not feel confident in their wealth to start the year. I'll give you just a quick tangent and we'll come back. I started my career in philanthropy in wealth management, and I remember meeting with somebody, and working wealth management will totally mess you up in terms of how you think about wealth, just so be careful if you do it. So meeting with somebody who had, about a net worth of about $100 million. So in the wealth management space, pretty rich, not crazy. It's like, what? And so, and he was 80. And this is several years ago during a similar downturn, and he was thinking, do I have enough? And I'm like, you are 80 years old, and you have $95 million, you have enough. But that's the psychology of wealth, right? And so you have to understand the psychology of wealth for somebody who has $95 million or somebody who has $95,000. And this has been a pretty wonky year. And so we have to get back to the original question, we have to retain those donors. We have to do great customer service, and we have to meet them where they are at any point in time with the wealth that they're giving. And if this happens to be a year where they're pushing pause, then we need to be having other conversations about legacy giving, about next-gen engagement, about taking them on site visits, because we have to be thinking 5 and 10 years out with these relationships.
Thank you for that. I think, before we get into great wealth transfer, because we are going to get into it, I do want to talk a little bit more about this tax law, because, and I'm going to put you back on the spot, Tim, because I know what we have heard and seen is, the new universal above the line charitable deduction was projected to unlock around 8 million new donors. That's what we were being told. What are we seeing come out of that? What is that actually looking like in reality? How should we be preparing for that? What do we need to be telling our donors? How do we need to be messaging and educating them?
There's a lot of processing happening right now with professional advisors and donors. So if you look at the Bank of America study on high net worth philanthropy, comes out every 2 years, 2025 was the last report. One of the things that donors reported, they study affluent donors, which they define as donors with $1 million or more in net worth, excluding their home, and or $200,000 in annual income. So again, that's not crazy rich, right? That's actually middle affluent. The number one thing that they're looking for advice for is how much to give and how to give. And so right now there's a lot of processing with donors about what are these tax law changes, what do they mean? We can't talk about this tax law without talking about the last big change, which was in 2017, and that was the Tax Cut and Job Act. That reduced the number of itemizers significantly, which means that it really reduced the number of people who are claiming deductions on their taxes. The biggest driver of that was the SALT cap, state and local tax cap. So we saw that go down, which means fewer people itemizing, mostly homeowners and high net worth individuals. That cap has gone back up under this most recent tax law change. So that's really good news for everybody in the room. That means potentially more givers who are giving with at least some tax motivation. So something to be thinking about. If you have lapsed donors and you have any data that tells you that they are in a top tax bracket, you need to be talking to those donors. That's good news. The above the line charitable deduction, also good news, but it's only $1,000, $2,000 married filing jointly. So that's, it's not going to unlock, it's not going to be transformational. But I think, again, for next-gen donors, that's a great conversation to be having with anybody sort of under the age of 30 who's been giving $100 a year or $250 a year. Talk to them about giving $1,000. That's great news. But there are challenges with giving at higher income and wealth levels. And the two main drivers for the individuals are, there's a new floor on giving. So whenever I talk to people about giving and deductibility, I talk about three things. What's your adjusted gross income? What kind of organization are you giving to? What assets are you giving? On the adjusted gross income side, there's now a floor you have to meet. It's a 0.5% floor on your AGI to even qualify for deduction. So there's now a new squeeze at the bottom. There's now a new squeeze at the top. For people in the top tax bracket, you actually can't deduct the full value relative to the 37% tax bracket, which basically means there's a little bit of a haircut at the top. So high net worth individuals, top tax bracket, squeeze at the bottom, squeeze at the top. We don't know yet what that means. We suspect there'll be more bunching, which means they'll put 5 or 6 years of giving potentially into DAFs, and then dole that out over a period of time. But again, I think it's going to take a couple of years until people see their tax returns, meet with their CPAs, really process that information. So a lot of people are in like figure it out mode. I'm way more scared about corporate giving. I'm very bearish about corporate giving. I talked about individuals have a new floor for giving, so do corporations, it's 1%. A lot of corporations talk offhand about giving 1%. So what does that mean? Are they now going to give 2%, which would be awesome, but they can't deduct the first 1%, and they have a 10% cap. So essentially there's like a 9% deductibility window for them, and so we don't know. And so if I were advising anybody, a shop of one person, a shop of 100 people, I would be really leaning into individuals now and really reducing any exposure or expectations I have on corporate giving. So that was a big dump of sort of tax law blarby-blarb, but I'm happy to talk about anything more in depth.
I would say we're probably going to have a lot of Q&As on the tax pieces because there is so much to unpack there. We could have done this whole panel just asking Tim questions about tax law.
And to be clear, I'm not a tax attorney or a CPA, so I'll give you what I know, but this is a time to really be leaning into your board members or advisory councils or like friends of your org who are practitioners and or be seeking that information out from people who actually are practicing the field, because I can tell you what I know, but it's not it's not deep.
So I think that along the lines of tax code, something that is equally as opaque for maybe many of us is this entire piece around bequests. And what is this so quick show of hands, how many folks in the room feel pretty familiar with this concept of the great wealth transfer and what we are expecting to see? Okay, so about 70% of the room, so we've got some good familiarity, a few folks who are newer coming into this. How many folks have people on your team who are specifically focused on planned giving? All right, so a much smaller percentage in the room. So with this, I think that's a concern for a lot of organizations. So one of the things we know, right, so the Great Wealth Transfer there have been some great studies on it. If you are interested in looking at more, I think Russell James is the person I would go to read it. He is a professor at University of Texas. He has really good, really accessible data about what this looks like. But basically, the boomer generation has a lot of accumulated wealth. They were able to buy those houses for $94,000 back in the 60s, and they have been stockpiling cash. And that cash is coming down to the millennials. The trajectory has now changed. They are saying that the initial projection of what year they expected that to come to fruition is a little bit more delayed, only because they're realizing that the women are going to be inheriting that, and they're going to live longer. So I see a lot of ladies in the room. We're here. We will be the ones that are receiving that wealth. And within that, it also means that it will be a little delayed, but it is coming. What that's going to look like is something around the tune of 18 trillion with a T dollars in charitable giving coming to the nonprofit sector. In an ideal world, that would be evenly distributed across every nonprofit in the country. And if it was, this is kind of how big that number is. This was really interesting to me. If every nonprofit were to receive a donation as a result of the Great Wealth Transfer when it happens, we would all be getting $2 million checks. Every single nonprofit in the country. How many of us assume that that is going to be equitably distributed across all of us? It is not. And so with this, bequest is a really big deal right now. We have to be planning for that. So for organizations in the room, a big piece of this is a lot of our shops are not set up for planned giving. It is something I know historically when I've been in a shop of one, that's something that in my mind I was like, oh, when I have a few folks on my advancement team, then I'll add somebody that can do that. Once we have a more mature donor base, when we have folks that we feel like we can do this with, at that point we'll do it, but we're just too small to do that now. That's no longer the conversation. It is now, if you are not thinking about this, we are leaving money, and future money is on the table. Another thing Laura mentioned in her presentation that we saw also is that giving to a bequest actually increases the likelihood of people consistently giving to your annual fund year over year until that bequest comes to fruition when they die. But it is actually a good indicator of kind of increasing that donor retention and legacy. So I'm curious, talk to us about, Megan, let's start with you, and then Jaz would love to hear from you. What are you doing within your organizations? How are you planning for this? How are you setting yourselves up to be thinking about bequest and planned giving right now?
Well, I just want to start off with some, I totally understand and sympathize, and I'm right there with you on I assume that many of us in this room, we need money now, right? Like, I don't need money in 20 years. I need money now. I have a budget to meet this year. I don't have an endowment. I don't have whatever. I have the programs and the salaries of the people who run them that I've got to do this year. And so it's hard for me to think about segmenting a portion of my time to something that could happen in 20 years, right? That being said, it is very important, and I'm here to say, I think also fairly easy to just start getting the word out there. And so, in your annual report, there's a blurb about put us in your will. In any of your giving materials, on your website, there's a section giving, if you love Ignatius House, will you consider a gift in your will? So it doesn't have to be a whole program. It doesn't have to be super figured out. But there are things you can do just to kind of give donors a little thought about it. And just to take away some of it's not difficult for a donor to put you in their will. It's one sentence. You can give them a copy and paste sentence. They don't, if they're doing a will, they already have a lawyer, they already have that. We don't have to do that. We just have to make sure that they have our legal name, our full address, and our EIN. That's all they need to be able to make a gift to us in their will. So that's pretty easy on our part. And I'd say that also part of that, that we've been talking about is the relational aspect. And so what you're already doing to build relationship with your donors, that good stewardship, that good transparency, all of that's feeding into them having an affinity for your organization and therefore possibly wanting to put you in their will. And I would also just add in, you don't have to, I think one of the interesting things as I was reading the report last night is that they've looked at this, and a lot of people around age 58 are doing their will. So you don't have to, just think, okay, if you're 70 or over, you can be talking to your middle-aged donors who are thinking about putting their wills together. And it doesn't have to be the super affluent donors either. It can be, I've read one, there's a statistic, monthly donors are 30% more likely to put you in their will. They're the ones that already have that. It can be monthly donors. It can be the donor that you see in your database who's given $100 a year for 10 years. Those are the ones, they may not be your major donors, but those are the ones that I would look to first, the ones that have been around for a long time and say, hey, is this something you'd be interested in?
Also, volunteers are huge for this as well. If you have a good volunteer program, that's also a really good place to be thinking about it. Yeah, Jaz, how about you?
So I love everything you shared, Megan. As far as practicals, those are phenomenal practicals to make sure that things are set up for bequest. I think for many of us, as we navigate the tension between ensuring that we meet our annual fund goals and long-term goals, is really taking the time to audit what does your relationship building look like. Many of us do navigate between transactional and relational in this work, but taking some time to truly audit what do your most meaningful relationships with your donors look like? How do you replicate that? How do you deepen those relationships so that as you continue to do the deep listening, as you continue to navigate towards their plans for the future, you have a great foundation for them to lean on to say, you know what, I do want to ensure that this organization is a part of my expiration plans. And so I really lean into the connectivity and leaning into what does it look like to say, what do you care about? How am I deeply listening? How am I using that data that you've given me through that deep listening to ensure that we're having conversations of ongoing for whatever point you decide to turn the corner with me into post-life plans?
Yeah. And Tim, I mean, I'm curious. Sorry, y'all. I'm curious because, and especially coming out of a space, and though, as a former wealth advisor, as a recovering wealth advisor, what are some other tips that we should be thinking about? What are good ways to talk to donors about this? When we're thinking about that donor psychology, right? Like, what are the things we should be exploring and with our donors?
So plus one to what's already been said, I think if I were really trying to strategically invest in a plan giving program, I would hyper focus on retirement assets because it is both a lifetime and post-death plan, right? So we talked a little bit about QCDs earlier. Remember, a QCD is a qualified charitable distribution. If you're 70 and a half or older from an IRA, individual retirement account, you can direct up to, I think this year it's $111,000 without realizing that income personally. You can double that to $222,000 across a married couple. What's powerful about that is there's a lot of wealth in retirement assets. They're often the best tax advantage way to give during life and at death. And so if I were anybody in the room, I'd say, okay, can my database pull a list of anybody who is 70 years old or older? Have we had a conversation with them recently? Do we have any data on their wealth profile? Were they a doctor? Were they a lawyer? Were they in professional services? Those people have retirement assets. And are they monthly givers? So if I'm looking at the Venn diagram, if I've got, a 72-year-old woman who retired as a partner at a law firm and she gives me $100 a month, I am let me talk to you about QCDs. And as a part of that, let's also talk about what are your post-death plans for those retirement assets. Recent tax law changes have made it harder to give those to the next gen because they have to be essentially distributed out over 10 years. There could be some income tax ramifications for that. So a lot of things that go into that. I think having that conversation with that demographic, that's where I would start, because that all of a sudden feels manageable, right? Give me your donors, 70 or older, who give monthly, and say, okay, we're going to have a conversation with those 50 donors or those 100 donors. So that's where I would really start practically. And of course, all the things that you think about too that are, if you've got individuals who are married or single who have no children, ring a ding ding. Talk to them, please.
Double income, no kids.
I love it. I love a dink. We talk about also Henrys, high earners, not rich yet. We would love a Henry. So that's where I would be. I would not be trying to boil the ocean on a plan. I would start somewhere that feels really achievable and attainable, and then grow into the other things as you get more assets or more resources or more confidence. Language really matters. Also, James has great data on language with plan giving. People are really happy to talk to you about a gift from their will. They're not as excited to talk to you about a strategic plan for legacy giving. They don't like that. So those are just some practical tips.
And let's keep talking a little bit about the non-cash assets, because we know that is a really fast vehicle for donor giving. Given that, within a smaller organization, what are some things we should be doing in terms of kind of creating some menus of options for our donors? What does that look like for you all on the ground?
I'm happy to start and then defer to my colleagues. You don't need to have somebody with a JD who has spent 15 years in charitable planning to talk about non-cash assets. What's really important to remember is when we talk about the great wealth transfer, the majority of that wealth is not in cash. It's in marketable securities, yay. It's in real estate, it's in business interest, tricky. It's in crypto. There are great ways to address all of these things. One, if you think you can justify it, opening up a brokerage account, at the same place that has your checking and savings accounts, that's a great way to take gifts of stock, right? That's one. Two, when I came on board the Community Foundation, we are accepting directly non-cash gifts, including gifts of residential commercial real estate, business interests. It is a huge lift, and it's potentially very risky from a compliance standpoint. I outsourced all of that. Unless there's an exception, there's always an exception. But I outsource all of that to some third-party providers. Realty Gift Fund, great organization that helps you take gifts of real estate. Brian Klantz's group is a great group to take all kinds of non-cash assets. Brian Klantz used to work at the Community Foundation. He's now based in Florida, but speaks nationally on this. They can take business interests of all kinds, real estate, funky assets, art and collectibles. And then three, I'd say like the Giving Block is our provider for gifts of cryptocurrency. The Giving Block can create a wallet for you. Easy. Now there's an additional fee, of course, but the potential to help it make it easy for a donor who wants to give $1 million in real estate or $1 million in business interests, I just, for most of us in the room, taking that in-house, it's just, the juice is not worth the squeeze. And so those are some just quick tips I would say to take, like, and when I'm saying non-cash assets, I'm meaning things other than marketable securities.
Everything Tim just said. When I was working at Boys and Girls Club, somebody decided they wanted to give us a boat. Sounds great, right? What am I going to do with a boat in Atlanta? And so what I learned from that example was how important it is to outsource, outsource, outsource. And for those of us who are in varying size organizations, outsourcing seems like a big word that costs money that we're trying to raise. But when we think about what we are experiencing is there are people who are wanting to give all these non-cash assets and just ensuring that we don't have to be the expert, we don't have to be the one to do it, we don't have to put our hands on it, and we don't have to pull a boat into our parking lot. And so just keep remembering to outsource.
So at Ignatius House, we have the desire. Apparently, there's like a sign on our thing that I can't see that says, "Donate your baby grand pianos here," because everybody wants to give us a baby grand piano, and I understand these are valuable things that have sentimental value. You don't want to sell it. You don't want to do whatever, but you know we only need so many. We have one, we only need one. We don't need more. And so I think part of that is also educating your donor and saying, this is so kind of you and we really appreciate it, but there's nothing we can do with this gift. The best thing that you can do for us is for you to sell this and give us the money. That's the kindest, best thing. And donors want to be helpful, right? So and they think they're being helpful by offering you a baby grand piano. I'm not kidding. In the last year, I've been offered 5 baby grands.
Have you been talking to my mother-in-law?
Is she one of them? As part of that, probably wealth transfer. It was a thing to have a baby grand, and now you're downsizing, and I don't know. But donors want to be helpful, and so telling them, the kindest thing you can really do. I love this idea, but it would be for you to sell it and give us the funds. We need the funds. We don't need the baby grant. But as far as, opening up these options to our donors, letting them know, because, donors don't know. They don't know that they can give stock. They may not know about QCDs. They may not know about, cryptos. Yeah. All these things can be donated. So again, with my easy tips, what I like to do with it, like if I'm sending out an appeal letter or an email, I always have a ride along with it. So a flyer that goes with it that says, so if it's Christmas, five ways to support Ignatius House this Christmas. I've got my appeal letter that's got my heart story, my statistic, and my need, and then I've got a colorful flyer with some pictures, and it says, 1, the first thing you can do is just donate to our appeal. Number 2, give via stock, and here's how to do it, who's the person to contact. encourage them that it's easy, tell them that they can avoid capital gains tax by doing that. Number 3, give via QCD. If you're 70 and a half and older, you can do it this way. 4, become one of our monthly donors. So I love giving donors a menu and letting them just know that there's options, because people can enter at different points. So, even a monthly donor, I don't have, maybe I don't have $1,000 that I can give you now, but I can give you $100 a month. And that ends up being actually more money, and we love that. So those flyers, they're not super hard to put together. They ride along with your existing appeal letter. It can be at the bottom of your appeal email, just giving options.
Yeah, and I think this is great feedback, y'all. Thank you for doing this. I think that's one of the areas that it feels a lot trickier than it is. I think so many times I've been like, I'm not a state attorney. I don't know what the protocols around this are. I'm not equipped to advise you, but it's actually quite much simpler than I think we often have been made to believe it is. And I think to y'all's point, there are resources available to lean on. There are ways that can be directed. You do not have to become an expert in these things. There are resources, Community Foundation, of course, being a great place to provide resources and direction, and also being willing to say, we're a really small shop, we appreciate your intention here, let's redirect you slightly, is great. One thing too that I think is coming up here that also came out of the data that Laura shared is also that we're not asking enough. We're not asking frequently enough. We're not broadening the types of asks we're making enough. In the report this year, it highlighted that the average donor is currently giving 4.25 times per year. That's a lot more than we expect. I think a lot of times we're like, oh, we already made our asks to them this year. Put them back in the cycle, we'll see them in 12 months. That is not the way that donors are operating now. It is much less on a calendar year. It is much less on just a tax-based giving incentive. It is based on how many times they're being asked and what the reason is. What is the motivation for this particular campaign or this particular need that you're having at this moment? So with that in mind, what does that look like for you all right now? How many times a year are you asking the same donor, and what have you seen in terms of some ROI from that?
That was, I was very surprised by that statistic when I read it, that it was 4 times a year, because I'm thinking so many of my donors are year-end givers, right? Like, you can ask them in spring and summer and at an event, but they're going to give their gift sometime between December 15 and December 31. But when I actually looked at the data, our actual gift, the average is closer to, it's 3 to 4 times a year. And not coincidentally, we do 3 to 4 appeals a year. And so donors are responding when we ask. It's really a beautiful thing. So of course, there are those once a year donors that skew things one way, and then you've got your monthly donors who skew things the other way, so people that are giving 12 times a year. Side note, so monthly donors, I love a monthly donor. I love a monthly donor at any level, because these are people that are committed to your organization. They're the ones more likely to put you in their will. They're also very likely to make a 13th or 14th gift when you're doing a special appeal. If you make them feel like they're a part of your community and that you need them and all, we have donors, that they're giving, maybe they give $100 a month, and then the appeal happens and they give us $1,000. So, you don't have to necessarily exclude your monthly donors from your asks. You might want to have a little aside of, letting them know that you see them. I think the stuff I'm talking about with segmenting and all this kind of stuff, letting donors know that you see them. I see that you're a monthly donor. I know you're a monthly donor. We appreciate it so much. We also have this specific need right now. And so if there's something, if you can give an extra gift right now, that would be great. I think I got off. Yeah, I got off the thing. Okay.
Nailed it. Jaz, how about you?
So because I just got to one goal, I'm going to lean on past experiences, because we are in a place where we're strategically planning how often are we going to ask, but one of the things that I've come to realize, like in my past, I'm still a pastor, and so we asked 52 times a year and people gave. And so what it showed me was that people do give when you ask, but also not being afraid to ask more often, to be clear with the ask, to not feel like you're over asking. I've been in organizations where We've asked for things 10 different ways, 10 different times in the year, where we want you to give to the annual fund, we want you to give to this event, we want you to give to this particular section of the city, we want you to give, and in all of that, we didn't lose money by being willing to ask. And so really what I'm seeing and what the data supports is that when you ask with clarity, with a plan, with follow-up, the money does come. And so, right now we're in a space where we're figuring out what does it look like for us to ask, and who do we ask, and how often should we ask.
How about, what recommendations would you have, especially thinking about the DAF holders that Community Foundation is working with? I know it's a little different because that has, a little bit of an intermediary there that's supporting. What should we be thinking about in terms of how organizations are managing those asks and relationships with their representatives at the foundation?
Yeah, so I'll say to set some numbers, we have about 750 donor advised funds. There are 12 to 1,300 people connected to those donor advised funds. The average DAF is about 1.1 million, but there's some whales that skew that number. So the median DAF is about 140,000. Most of our donors come in knowing exactly what they want to do. They have a plan, they have the organizations they love, they want to support. Some want to hear from us, some want to come on site visits, some are seeking advice and counsel on organizations to give, and we have dedicated more resources to being out in community. We're doing a webinar series right now for the nonprofit sector on demystifying donor advised funds that we just wrapped up, and then we have an upcoming webinar on how to partner with the Community Foundation. And so I just want to help level set, most of our donors are please leave us alone. And that's fine. I think we still ask them to give to us, right? So right now we're going through a lapsed donor project where we have about 300 funds who have not put money in the last 3 years. So we're asking those individuals connected to those funds, hey, you have a DAF with us, you've been granting, have you thought about putting more money in? The stock market this year is really good. The stock market over the last 5 years, very good. So, let's talk about, is this a thoughtful time for you to do some bunching? Maybe put 5 years worth of giving into your DAF. On the flip side, our donor advised funds give all the time. So the smallest amount they can give is $100. We have a ton of people who give $100 gifts, sort of, echoing the stats that Laura was talking about from the report. Our donors are giving when the organizations that they trust and have relationships with are asking. So, because those dollars are set aside for charitable purposes, because the size of the median DAF, those are all major donors, right? So if you're getting $500 from a DAF, that should be considered a DAF from the Community Foundation at least. You should assume that that's a major donor now. So treat them, steward them the way that you would a major donor. Build relationships. We do not want to stand in the way of our donors giving to you. So we do not want to be a middleman, if at all possible. Now we do have anonymous donors for whom they've asked us to serve that role. And so if you're like, I don't know who gave me this gift, how do I steward them? You can forward the information to us, and we will get it to the donor. So that's just a practical tip. But most of our donors, they want to talk to you. They want to know what you're going through. They want to know what your most pressing needs are. Most of our DAF gifts are for general operating support. And so to the extent that we can be helpful in nurturing those relationships, we're happy to do that, but they're not looking to us necessarily to be a gatekeeper for most of those relationships. The only other thing I'll say is we are getting sort of anecdotal evidence of just some donor fatigue. People keep, the math right now is not mathing in terms of government support being down, costs being up, and the amount of money that's in philanthropy to solve that problem. It just doesn't work. And so we are getting some anecdotal evidence, the increased staff giving notwithstanding, that donors are starting to feel a little tired. So that's just something to think about.
Yeah, that's great. That's very good to know too. So we're getting close to time, so I want to do a final lightning round question. Knowing what we've seen, what we're hearing, what we see in the headlines from Giving USA this year, if you were going to, as you're thinking about, rest of 2026 going into your 2027 planning, what is the one thing you would prioritize going into the year? If you had to really really, not saying that you can't do the other things too, but if you were going to really over-index on something, what are you focusing on? Tim, I'll start with you and we'll just bring it back down.
And we're slightly different probably than many organizations in the room. We're hyper focused on stewardship. So we're trying to meet with donors. We're trying to ask them what they need. We're trying to make sure that they have great customer service. We are like all in on stewarding donors, big, medium, small, because we do need them to replenish their donor advised funds. We do know that wealth is transferring. We do know that there's great need in the community. We want the grants also going out into community. So when I first came to Atlanta, somebody brought me to an event at WABE, and the president of NPR, Kate Marr, was there. And somebody was like, why don't you do more Tiny Desk concerts for like young donors? And she's like, well, we do that. She's like, but I know my bread and butter is like a 64-year-old in Burlington driving a Subaru. And so that has stuck with me. I was like, who is my 62-year-old in Burlington driving a Subaru? Like, I think making sure your core is really served and served well, we're deeply focused on that right now.
Definitely echo that sentiment. Deepening relationships and ensuring that the relationships are quality relationships. The things that we see in the data from Giving USA as well as other wealth data shows us that even though the number of donors have lessened, the quality and depth of the gifts have increased, and so that only comes from deepening relationships, listening intently, and really making sure that you're acting on the things that the people you're connected to care about.
Same answer. Just as I said before, if I have to choose between retention and new acquisition, it's going to be retention, because these are people that have already said, they've already raised their hand, said, I'm interested in your cause, I believe in your cause, I'm going to make a donation to your cause. So nurturing those people, educating them on various giving options, inviting them to become a monthly donor, that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my time. Inviting them to come, if you have the option to come on campus, to see your program, to experience it firsthand. I love a donor gratitude event, big fan, once a year. And I'm all about, if even if they can't come, just inviting them is nice, So I pick a Wednesday in July and say for 2 hours we're going to drink wine and have cocktails, and we're going to drink wine and have tapas and tell you about the impact of your giving. And there's no ask, there's no whatever, it's just thank you. And that is something easy to plan. Doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Donors love it. They get to network with other donors. That type of thing is where I'm going to put my attention.
You heard it here first, folks. Retain your donors, steward them, make them feel good. Awesome. Thank you all so much. We are going to do some Q&A. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Great insight, y'all. We are going to open it up for some Q&A. Any questions in the audience?
Hi, so you guys mentioned monthly giving, which we are all in right now. We're really focused on that. But something that I have just noticed as a trend in the industry is that everyone else is also into monthly giving right now, and specifically larger national nonprofits. I see you nodding your head. You might see where I'm going. If you walk down the Beltline, there are, I'm not going to name names, but there are so many national nonprofits who will not ask you for a one-time gift. They're asking for monthly gifts. So what kind of worries me industry-wise as a smaller nonprofit is, are my donors getting fatigue from all of these organizations, not necessarily even asking for a one-time gift, they want to lock them in monthly. So do you have any tips for getting around that? I think that's kind of something that's probably on everyone's mind right now.
I honestly never think about whether they're giving to other monthly I'm just asking you to give to us. So I'm never thinking, oh, I hope 10 other organizations are in your inbox. So you think about that on Giving Tuesday, right? You know that your donors are getting bombarded with every organization they've ever given to with emails on Giving Tuesday. And so how do you make yours stand out? But for most of the time, I don't think about that's up to them. We're just giving them an option. This is another way that you can be a part of our community. This is another way that you can join the cause. maybe you're the type that gives to 10 organizations monthly. Maybe we're the only one. Doesn't matter to me. Thanks for being a monthly donor. I don't, not to be like nonchalant about it, but I think I would just say, you do what feels right to you and for your community, and it sounds like you're doing amazing, and your monthly donor community is growing. So just lean into that. Lean into the momentum that you're already building with that donor community.
And data does show, right? Donors on average, if they are donating, they're donating to 5 to 10 organizations a year. It is very, very rare that someone's exclusively giving to 1 or 2 organizations. If someone is philanthropically inclined, they're giving to multiple things within causes they care about.
Yeah, I tend to carry a chip on my shoulder at times where it's like, why wouldn't you give to me? Maybe it's because I used to be an athlete when I was younger. But when we think about the world we live in, if you're in a smaller organization, you actually have the gift of agility. And so how can you be agile in creating an opportunity for people in a way that's going to make them want to give to you? How do you tout what it is that you do because you care about it? How do you make sure you're connecting with people who do care about what you're talking about, do care about what you would like them to give to? And so there's an abundance mindset that we can have, and I will embrace that we live in Atlanta. And sometimes it can feel like we're competing, but Atlanta is a land of abundance. If we were in a city that does have access and opportunity and we weren't connected to so many places worldwide, maybe I could consider that there was scarcity. But the truth is that there is somebody who wants to give to you. And if you continue to have the mindset that they want to give to you and your organization, then what some large name brand organization, legacy organization is doing does not necessarily take away from what you're able to accomplish.
I'd love to increase my subject matter expertise on DAFs and QCDs. Is there a way to do that? Are there classes? Are there any kind of seminars? How can we do that and strengthen our knowledge base?
Well, we just did a couple of webinars. So go to our website and check them out. It's on demystifying donor advised funds, and there's like a great sort of high-level overview of what DAFs are, how they work, how we partner with DAF donors. So that's one. 2, the National Philanthropic Trust puts out a donor advised fund report every year. So that might be something you want to check out too. In terms of qualified charitable distributions, I think we already talked about Russell James has really good information out there. Nash, Purpose Possible is a great partner to talk to about strategic planning with charitable gifts. Plug. But I'd also say there are a lot of national organizations that put together great white papers that you can download. Big shops like CCS, and so a quick Google search will tell you. And I would just look for people or brands that you know and trust. Your local AFP often does great seminars on charitable giving. Another plug for the AFP people in the room. So, there's no shortage. It's really about finding how do you learn best? Is it a webinar? Is it a slide deck? Is it going and hearing somebody speak? So I would lean into your learning style, because for me, reading like a 30-page report on anything is not an effective way for me to learn.
You read the whole Giving USA report.
I did not. I read the executive summary and almost nothing else. I did, I will let Claude help me pick out facts and tidbits, but I will fully pass out reading the Giving USA report. Sorry, everybody.
So many buckets of coffee editing. It's intense. Yeah. It's a lot. Awesome. Other questions? Yeah.
Just a really quick question. Can you repeat that first resource that you said?
What did I say? Oh, I was talking about the webinar that we put on some webinars with the Community Foundation. Oh, National Philanthropic Trust. NPT is one of the largest independent donor advised fund programs. So not connected to a financial services firm, not connected to a community foundation or a single issue organization, but they provide back office support for a number of banks. So they manage like JP Morgan's donor advised fund program. They're the back office provider. So while they say that they're independent, they are deeply connected to many financial services firms. But they do great. There's great data, great reporting.
And since I'm talking with other ones, Staff Day is also
They offer a lot of free toolkits.
Great point.
Resources for small nonprofits.
Yep.
And it's awesome.
Great point. DAF Day.
That day is October 8th, this year.
And while we're sharing resources, I will say too, I know we talked a bit about bequests. Georgia Plan Giving Council is a really good resource as well. If you, Cressy's in the room. She is our representative in the room. Please see her.
There's a meeting tomorrow.
There is, yeah. But another good resource if you are looking for some deeper expertise on that, I would definitely recommend looking to them. Excellent. I think we are done with question time, but we have one more. Okay, our last question. Beer Caboose.
Here, hold on.
A little off topic of the questions, but you mentioned donor sites or site visits. So how does a small nonprofit that works fully remote in a community that does not gather for health reasons manage the request for a site visit? Hey, we want to learn more. We'd love to come visit you.
I mean, most of our site visits are virtual just because of timing. I mean, and honestly, like capacity. So, we have a spectrum of site visit options that we will do for donors. We look at data. So our data informs like where we're really leaning in. So we tend to look at where the DAF issue areas that our donors give to most. But also, if we're trying to uplift organizations that maybe are sort of under the radar, we will happily do a site visit over Zoom and invite donors to join us. So I mean, we want to meet where you are in terms of technology and your organization and the communities you serve. And so I wouldn't say just because you're virtual, it excludes you from participating.
Great, thank you.
And I would just add, how can you reimagine what a site visit looks like in terms of it might not be a site visit at all? Like getting to the heart of what is somebody trying to accomplish with a site visit. Usually with a site visit, they're trying to accomplish clarity on what you do. They want to have context. They want to get connection. They want to, check out who you are to make sure that you're legitimate. And so my suggestion, even in addition to a virtual site visit, is really asking the next question of that particular person requesting a site visit and say, hey, what do you want to accomplish? And then figuring out how we might be able to reverse engineer and accomplish that goal without it being a site visit, given the limitations.
So my question would be, you're talking about site visits, Megan, and you mentioned events. What does that look like for you guys? Is that something to actually invest in, doing the events to retain your monthly donors or to get new donors? What type of events do you hold?
So our most basic event is, we just call it a donor appreciation night. And so we invite our donors at a certain level and above because we're large and we also have limited parking, so we can only invite so many people. But it's a 2-hour event. What ours is that we meet in the dining room. We have wine and appetizers and let people chat, and then we go and have a short presentation from our executive director who just says, in 5 or 6 minutes, here's what we've done in the last year because of your giving. Might tell a story, might give some statistics. We've reached more young people than ever before this year. And then we have a presenter on a topic that we think would be meaningful for our donors. And so, I mentioned we did something about our ground. So we had a donor that talked about creation and nature and the importance of being in nature. And so he gave like a 20-minute presentation. He's a professor at Georgia State, so great speaker, engaging, and that's really it. So we have done like little donor gifts before. I'm not a huge fan of donor gifts because I think donors want us to use their money for the thing and not, but if you can give them a small token, a little candle, something like that. But it's a 2-hour event. You're kind of in and out, and even if you just invite them and they can't come, they know that you wanted them there. You know that this is something that's a part of your ethos, is just being grateful and sitting in gratitude with your donors. It could be, but another thing might be, so let's say if your program has a graduation of some sort, or invite your donors to the graduation, invite them into like that program or that type of thing, or whatever your nonprofit specializes in or does. that might be an opportunity to invite a donor into that. So our donor gratitude event, it's not, you don't see the people that we serve at our donor gratitude event, but there are other opportunities that we give people to throughout the year that they can see. Here's a graduation of our interns from our vocational training program. Here is an opportunity to experience our mission firsthand. So it doesn't have to be something set apart, but I think that's easy because you just put out some wine and some appetizers and you say thank you, and people love it. It's all good vibes. So
We've really focused on downsizing events because of costs and just ROI. And so I think when I joined, the Community Foundation sort of had a history of putting on big sort of expensive events, and we've really moved away from that. We're trying to lean into more intimate gatherings. So after this, I'll be scurrying back to the office. We're hosting a book club, and we thought we'd get 4 donors. We had 25 donors sign up. The author's not going to be there. They're going to come to a conference room and they're going to eat moon bowls. So it's a pretty low lift. It's pretty inexpensive, but they're really excited to talk about an issue. What I find is donors want to be together. They want to have a conversation, and then they want something to come away feeling like there's an action item for them. And so we're having our housing subject matter expertise lead a discussion on There Is No Place for Us. Obviously, a lot of buzz right now for that book. But we found that's really effective. And also hosting dinners in people's homes. People are nosy and they love to see other people's houses. So if you have board members and they'll host 10 people for dinner, that is a great investment. Maybe you split the cost with the board member, maybe you cover it all, but that is people will come to that. And so we're trying to get creative and do a less is more approach.
Shout out to Decatur Book Festival, who is the keynote for Decatur Book Festival this year, is the author of There Is No Place for Us. October 2nd.
Second, go.
Free and open to the public.
It's going to be a madhouse, but go early. Yeah, get in there early.
I will be honest and say I have a love-hate relationship with events. My previous role was 75% events, and contrary to what a lot of people say about events, our events were high ROI. My last event was 43% over goal in terms of my net. The reason I share that contextually is because what I experienced in scouting that was different from anywhere else I've worked in terms of events was that my board member and an entire committee of professionals that are high level that had influence were the ones fundraising. And I actually got my hand slapped when I started asking for money. And so it was more of this kind of trickle down effect from peers, those who on the board were supply chain leaders saying, I'm going to send an email to every vendor I have, and they're all going to be supporters and sponsors. And so for me, that's one of the only reasons I would say an event could yield a high ROI. But if you don't have that to lift, what I love about what we currently do is we have our board members host at their homes. Tim is right. People are nosy. People are like, I want to see where they live in. And so it has led to being able to increase awareness with a low lift because the board member and his wife paid for the charcuterie board, paid for the wine and drinks, and we just showed up and brought the program to life at their home. And so depending on what kind of relationships you have and the lift, that would skew how I view events, to be honest.
And y'all are picking up on something that we talked about in the panel too that seems very important as well, which is the value. I think it's rethinking how are we using events, right? It's getting away from the chicken dinner gala and into what does it look like to create and build and strengthen your community that is gathering around your cause, around your mission. So whether that's a thank you event, whether that's a book club, whether that is, a board hosted thing, it's those are your opportunities to steward and to strengthen those donor relationships, to make them see themselves reflected in the room of, oh, people like me are giving to causes like this at this type of amount. That makes sense. I'm going to continue to do that. We know, and that's where I think the conversation around right now that I've been seeing a lot is volunteerism dramatically increases people's likelihood to give to a donation because it increases the way they see themselves in that organization, that they feel part of the community of an organization. But it's a similar kind of thing. So I think it's a good call to let's maybe rethink a little bit what the purpose of that is and what the ROI needs to be. And if it's just strengthening those donor relationships and creating stronger connections for those donors, then that can be a good usage for that time.
You really batted up my next question very beautifully, because I wanted to talk about, ask folks to talk about the power of story in the work that they're doing. I heard Megan sort of reference that in the event that she was referencing. I'm a storyteller and story coach, and I'm always thinking about how storytelling is kind of embedded in everything that you're doing, but it's not just in the event and the speakers, it's also in the reports that you're writing and the way that you gather people. Can you talk a bit, because I really think that storytelling has the power to move the moral imagination. So can you talk about storytelling and the way that you think about storytelling and the work that you do?
Well, I'll jump in. Storytelling is my favorite thing to do. In the work that we get to do at One Goal, we are helping students navigate through one of the most challenging transitions of their lives, which is, what am I doing after high school? And so one of the ways that we utilize story is I've connect with our program team often to just say, hey, let me make this a low lift for you, because anybody in development knows that development and program, for whatever reason, have a hard time getting it together. But there are times where I just ask, what stories are you hearing? And in that, their everyday experiences are tremendous stories that are useful for our donor base. And so, whether it's a follow-up email where I say, hey, I just had a conversation with one of our students who was transformed by X, Y, and Z, or I'm having a sit-down coffee. Like yesterday, I had coffee with someone who is a potential donor, and as I asked her about her story, it brought up one of the stories that I learned from our program team, and there was an instant connection because that potential donor, her heart melded with that young lady who the story was about. And so, it's an everyday occurrence for us where we're talking about what are the stories that are happening, how is transformation taking place, where's the miraculous in the mundane? And I think that's what storytelling does, is it allows you to see the miraculous in the things that have become mundane in your day-to-day work.
I'll give a quick shout out for the AFP conference coming up on August 26th. Chirian Koshi's book that came out last year, Neurogiving, actually gets really into this and has some really interesting pieces around the donor psychology of the storytelling, that people's giving brains is not we have to be good at the transactional side of it, but it is actually using a different part of your brain that is much more story driven. And so this kind of connection of individual stories, tying it to that as opposed to more data driven stories are actually much more compelling. If you don't have tickets yet, you should come, and he's going to be keynoting that. So it's August 26th, right down the road at Atlanta Technical College. So hope y'all can join. Thank y'all. For real this time, let's thank the panel. We're actually good. Thank you all so much for being here today. Just a couple of very fast announcements before you head out. If you can, please take 30 seconds just to scan the QR code that is right by the exit in the lobby. We would love to hear your feedback on today's session, would be great. Also keep an eye out in your inbox. We're going to email out a recap blog with notes from today, key takeaways, and the full recording of the event. So if you have any colleagues or friends who weren't able to be here today, would love for you to help us share that. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your mornings. We know it is a busy time of year and really appreciate you spending the morning with us. Thank you.